Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much for leading us this evening. Again, another warm welcome. So glad that we can be together tonight. What a passage that we've just had read to us. It seems so full of the highest highs and the lowest lows, doesn't it? We're hearing about Jesus recognized as the one that everyone has longed for through the Old Testament. And here he is, and Peter identifies him. He says, "You're the Messiah." And then just moments later, it's all seeming quite different. The music changes because there is now a sense of, well, perhaps despair in the disciples' eyes and hearts as they realize that Jesus is going to suffer and be rejected and be killed. So let's go through this passage and let's think about it, because it also speaks to us as followers of Jesus. What does it mean to follow you, Jesus? Well, he's going to answer us in this passage as we read it together. So do keep your Bible open. The biggest question we could ever seek to answer is, who is Jesus? And this series through Mark in the evenings is about just that. And we're here at the end of Mark chapter 8. And there's a kind of structure to the passage that we've just read. The start of it, well, it speaks about identity. Who is Jesus? His identity. And then after Peter recognizing that Jesus is the Messiah, we'll work out what that means in a moment, we then hear about the destiny of Jesus. The destiny of Jesus. And then the passage finishes with Jesus saying to his disciples and to you and me, "Follow me." So we're going identity, destiny, follow me. That's where we're going over the next few minutes. So the first section is about Jesus' identity. We've had the passage so beautifully read to us, but let's just read that paragraph again. So we're looking together at Mark chapter 8 and just the four verses 27 to 30 at this moment. We'll have it on the screen, here it is, as well as in our Bibles. Keep checking them both. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Well, they're on the road. I don't know about you, but I often have my best conversations on the road, whether it's walking or driving, just traveling, somehow looking in the same direction. And they're on the road, and Jesus, he says to the people, to the disciples, "Who do people say I am?" Jesus knows the answer to the question. He knows what people are saying, but he wants to awaken in the disciples this question of his identity. And they come up with different answers. Some people are saying that he's John the Baptist. Herod thought that Jesus might be John the Baptist. Herod, racked perhaps with guilt over the evil thing he'd done of beheading John the Baptist, at one point was talking to some others in the room and said, well, maybe he's John the Baptist come back from the dead. Others were saying that Jesus was this great prophet who was to precede the Messiah. We can read about that in the Old Testament. Or one of the other prophets. What these people are all saying is, Well, Jesus is another one of these messengers from God. And they're half right. Jesus is a messenger from God. But he's not just another one. He is the image of the invisible God. It's in Jesus that all the fullness of the Godhead dwells in bodily form. Jesus is God come to us. He is not just another messenger from God, as glorious as it is that God has spoken through prophets at various times and various ways. John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the prophets. But Jesus now turns to his friends, his apprentices, his disciples who are walking along beside him, and he looks at them and he says, well, who do you say I am? I wonder who you say Jesus is. Another messenger? Another person with a helpful philosophy for us to reflect on? Or someone unique and glorious with no equal in history? Jesus is looking at his disciples, and Peter, he answers. You can see that in verse 29. He says, "You are the Messiah." I wonder if you know what this word Messiah means. If a king was to be chosen to be the new king, the prophet would come and he would have some anointing oil and he would come to this future king. He might just be a shepherd at this point, or he might be one of a number of candidates, but the prophet would come with oil and would pour it on this person's head. Anoint him, if you like, with oil. That's how it worked through the Old Testament. It's a kind of prophetic act to indicate that God is on this man in a special way. And now, as this bloke carries on his walk around town, it might be years that pass. But everyone would see him and they'd say, you know who that is? It's the next king. They'd say, he's the chosen one, they might say. He's the one. Or for short, they might say, he's the anointed one, anointed. And the word in Old Testament Hebrew was Messiah. And if we translated that into Greek, the word is Christ. So Messiah, Christ, it means anointed one. And it's a loaded phrase. It means that this is the next one, or this is the chosen one, this is the one, this is the king. He's the Christ, he's the Messiah, he's the chosen king. And Peter says to this man who's probably only got one outfit, shuffling along in his sandals where he's been traveling down from Galilee, the man who's been a carpenter has probably got still some sawdust under his fingernails. And he says to him, you are the Messiah. There were these chosen kings who came, but there was this one chosen king who was going to come, the greatest of the chosen kings, the Son of David, the king who is going to just wrap it all up and bring it all home and bring all glory into the world and to God for his purposes played out in the world. And Peter announced on this dusty road, you are that one, Jesus. I don't know if you've got some financial people in the room. How are you at reading graphs? Well, here's a graph. Well, Peter has worked out the trajectory of Jesus' life. If you were to measure it on a graph with kind of glory at the top and shame at the bottom, well, the story of Jesus, this man, this carpenter, walking down this country road, it's all up from here. It's glory because Jesus, you're the anointed King. You're the Messiah. Let's have a quick chat around the table. If you're first time here, this is something we love to do on a Sunday night. We just kind of talk to each other for a moment about the passage we're reading. Now, last week, Josh spoke to us, and he shared with us about a man who was born blind and how Jesus healed this man. But it's very unusual how it happened. You see, to start with, as Jesus takes him out of the town and he touches him, well, the man, he can see sort of, and he sees people, and it's all out of focus like a fuzzy tree walking around. And then Jesus touches him again, and now he can see clearly. It's a bit of a challenging question tonight. Can you see any parallel? Now, Mark has purposefully put that healing miracle just before this moment. And in this healing miracle, there's this man, and he can't see it all, and then suddenly he can see part of the picture. And he's looking and he's describing it, but he's not seeing it clearly. And then Jesus has to touch him again, and then he can see clearly. Any thoughts? Talk around your table. Here's Peter. He thinks he can see it all. But what do you think? Let's take a minute. Well, let's bring it back together. I wonder what you think. Let's read on a bit and then let's think again. So here we are back in the passage. We've got down to verse 30, and there's this surprising thing. Jesus is saying, don't tell anyone about me, this element of who he is, the Messiah. They're to keep on speaking of the kingdom of God that is coming, to be calling people to repentance. But this is kind of further than they've got yet. And actually, it's further than the disciples have got yet. They've got part of the picture. They're not seeing it all clearly. Let's read on. We're going now to verse 31. Verse 31. We're thinking together about identity, destiny, follow me. So verse 31. It says this. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Peter, he thought he got it. He thought he could see it clearly. Jesus, it's all glory from here. But now, Jesus takes Peter and he takes the disciples to one side. And he explains to them about the destiny, the journey ahead of the Son of Man. Now, the Son of Man is one of the names of Jesus, a name that he uses for himself. And in the middle of the book of Daniel, we find reference to one like a son of man. Just doesn't just mean a bloke, a son of another bloke. It's a special prophetic title that Jesus takes on to himself. Because this mysterious character, the Son of Man in Daniel, he is led into the glory of God and shares the glory of God and shares dominion and rule and authority with God, this mysterious human who shares the glory of God. It's a mystery. What could that be about? And Jesus takes that phrase and he uses it to speak of himself. So in a way, he's endorsing what Peter has said about him being the Messiah, and he's actually amplifying what Peter understands about Messiah. It's not just another anointed king or an ultimate anointed king who is going to take the rule on earth to some new level, but rather this is an anointed king who's going to have the glory of God. So he's picking up Peter's phrase of the Messiah, and he's amplifying it all the more to say, use it as the Son of Man, the picture from Daniel. But then in the same sentence, he shows Peter and the others, probably using the scriptures. Jesus often took the Old Testament scriptures. I wonder what passages he might have taken to speak of suffering. Perhaps Isaiah 53. Speaking of the suffering servant, of his rejection, that he would be killed and after 3 days rise, perhaps taking one of the Psalms or speaking from Hosea, on the third day he'll revive us. And Jesus shows to the disciples how the Son of Man, the Messiah, has to suffer, be rejected, be killed, and after 3 days rise. And this is where Peter begins to rebuke Jesus. He sounds like he interrupts him and he tells him off. And he reminds Jesus, no, this is where we're going. It's all glory from here. And Jesus, as he speaks, shows him a bigger bit of the picture. There's going to be terrible shame and suffering and rejection. And it seems that as Peter hears Jesus speaking, he only hears this bit: the suffering, the rejection, the death, the shame. And that's why Peter has begun to rebuke him. But now, how interesting. This has really captivated me this week, this short phrase. Jesus turned and looked at his disciples. Jesus, of course, he could have just headed straight for glory. He had all the glory of God for eternity, before time began. He's the glorious, eternal Son of God. He could go straight for glory. But he doesn't want to do that. And he turns and looks at his disciples. Imagine him looking at you and looking at me. He looks at us. He looks at his disciples. And then, having looked at his disciples, that's when he now rebukes Peter. Why might that be? You know, he loves his disciples. He loves you. He loves me. He has the intention that you would be with him for eternity. That you wouldn't be condemned for your sinfulness, for your wrongness, but rather that you would be forgiven and would be with him forever. In another place in Hebrews, it speaks of the joy set before Jesus. It was because of that he endures the cross. Yes, to be obedient to his Father, but it was to have you with him in glory. That was motivating him to go to the cross. So he doesn't turn straight to rebuke Peter. He instead first looks at the disciples, and perhaps his heart is filled with love for them, a love that would mean he would lay his life down for them, a love that's longing that they would be with him for eternity, a longing that they would no longer be condemned, a longing that they would be free, a longing that they would live life in all its fullness. So he looks at them, and then he rebukes Peter, setting his face again perhaps like flint to go towards the cross. So he rebukes Peter. Peter had just now spoken, well, a revelation of God. But now he's rebuked as bringing a message from Satan that he wouldn't go to the cross. And so he rebukes Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." And he challenges him. You don't have in mind the concerns of God, merely human concerns. Peter was in for the ride if it's going to be up towards glory all the way. But that's a kind of human approach. Jesus wants to challenge the disciples to be ready to lay down their lives as Jesus will, to suffer, to be rejected, to die. And he wants to tune their hearts. Can you kind of see now why Mark might have put that miracle in his arrangement of the document just before this? There is the man who is blind, and he can only kind of half see it, fuzzy and out of focus. And then another intervention, and he begins to see it clearly. And here are the disciples, and they can't see it clearly, fuzzy and out of focus. They're saying it's glory all the way from here. And now Jesus, by the work of the Spirit, is going to tune their hearts that they'd understand that there's suffering and rejection and death on the road before the glory and the resurrection. Well, let's read the last part together. We've thought about identity, and we thought about destiny, and now it's about follow me. It's verses 34 down to the end of the passage. Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul. If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. Jesus, what does it mean to be your disciple? What does it mean to follow you? Well, here in this passage, he's going to tell us what it means to be his disciple. I was on the phone a few days ago. We have a monthly Oak Hall Expeditions prayer night. It's the first Thursday of each month. If anyone want to come, you're all welcome. We have people from all over the world, and it's very exciting. But this last month, there was a man called Nihad, and he is in Bethlehem, and he is a follower of Jesus, and he is in a place where he's in great danger. And we were talking to him and praying for the situation there, and praying for this brother of yours and mine who follows Jesus on the wrong side of the border there in Bethlehem. And we kind of said to him, look, Nihad, why do you stay? There are Americans and English and Germans. And they'd all say, just come to safety, come to be with us. He seemed a bit astounded at the question. He kind of leaned forward towards the camera and he said, well, that's what following Jesus is about, isn't it? It's about laying down your life. The one who wants to save their life, they're going to lose it. But the one who lays down their life for Jesus and for the good news about Jesus, well, their life is going to be saved. He kind of couldn't understand the question. Surely that's what you're all doing, isn't it? Laying down your lives for Jesus. That's always what he's been asking us to do, Nihad was saying. What a challenge. This is how Jesus explained it. He said that those who want to be his disciples should stop living for themselves, take up their cross, and follow him. Now, we, this side of Jesus' death and resurrection, we recognize a cross. Well, that's the news about Jesus, the news of his rescue. It's about God's love come to us. But back then, before Jesus gone to the cross, before people understood what you've seen, it would be like saying, well, whoever wants to follow me needs to get a wheelbarrow and carry around an electric chair with them. Everybody would say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you move an electric chair with you? Of course, back then, if you're carrying a cross, you're as good as dead. You're condemned. People can do what they like to you. And you're heading to the cross and you're going to die in shame. And Jesus says, carry your cross and follow me. And he expands on that. He says, look, if you want to save your life, if you're going to live to make your life secure, if you're going to live for your own comfort, if you're going to live for your own agenda, you're in danger. You're going to lose your life. But instead, if you're a person who would lay down their life for Jesus, if you're a person who says, well, I've got these two options here. This one's going to be safe and convenient and glorious. And this option is going to be dangerous and inconvenient, but it's obedient to Jesus. Then I'm going to choose this one. That's what it means to be losing our lives. Where we say, I'm not going to be the Lord of my life anymore. Jesus, you be the Lord of my life. I'm going to be obedient to you. That's what it is. To be losing our life for him. And for some people, even today, it's meant them actually losing their lives. They were breathing at the start of the day, and they're not breathing any longer because they're following Jesus, and they're not going to deny him whatever the cost. There's a girl, and a few days ago she got put on a bus by the government in Iran. She's an Afghani girl. And in Iran, as a refugee, she's given her life to follow Jesus. But now, the Iranian government has put her on a bus and have bused her to a camp, and then from this camp, she's being bused over the border to Afghanistan, a place where people who follow Jesus lose their lives. And she was frantically texting a friend of mine as she was heading towards the border. But she's not going to deny Jesus. She has read this passage like we're reading it tonight. And she says, well, if somebody loses their life for Jesus, they'll save it. That's what every Christian believes, isn't it? And Jesus then explains, look, what good is it if you gain the whole world, yet forfeit your soul? Or you get to the point of judgment. What could be given in exchange for a soul? Do you know only one thing can be given in exchange for a soul? And that is Jesus' life. Maybe you're feeling, well, I'm heading towards a judgment. I'm in trouble. I don't have anything to offer. Well, the good news about Jesus is his suffering and his dying was so that someone could be given in exchange for your soul. That's what we're going to celebrate in just a moment. And he says, if you're ashamed of me and my words, then he will be ashamed of them when he comes. There's such a challenge, an invitation here, isn't there? We're being called to be men and women who are disciples of Jesus, ready to deny ourselves, to be associated with this King who dies on a cross, whatever the shame that might be involved, ready to lose our lives for the sake of Jesus' kingdom. Not chasing after gaining the whole world. Because what good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? We're being called not to be ashamed of Jesus, not to be ashamed of his words. Let's have another chat around the table, and let's think about how this applies to you and to me. Let's have a chat about this. Anything you want to bring out, point out, help us to see?